Hey scholars. Okay, so the last thing that we heard in Holes was that Stanley had just taken credit for something that he did not do. Do you remember? I think it was X-Ray who stole the sunflower seeds from Mr. Sir. And then he was kind of throwing them around to different boys, and Stanley caught them, even though he didn't really want any sunflower seeds. He ended up with the sack of sunflower seeds in his hands as when Mr. Sir came back. And he tried to cover it up or bury it, but he wasn't able to completely conceal the bag. And so Mr. Sir figured out that he had it, and he blamed Stanley for stealing the bag of sunflower seeds. And instead of denying it and blaming it on X-Ray, who actually stole the bag, I'm pretty sure it was X-Ray, wasn't it? Stanley actually took credit for it, for the theft. I'm just double checking here. Oh, no, it was Magnet. Remember he said my fingers are like little magnets, so he's always stealing things? Yeah, so anyway, Magnet actually stole the bag, but Stanley took the blame, and now Stanley's about to get into big trouble, and he's going to meet the warden, because the warden's the one who deals out the consequences at Camp Green Lake. So here we go, chapter 20. It felt good to walk in the shade of the 2 oak trees. Stanley wondered if this was how a condemned man felt on his way to the electric chair, appreciating all of the good things in life for the last time. A condemned man is somebody who has gotten the death penalty and is going to be killed. They had to step around holes to get to the cabin door. Stanley was just surprised to see so many around the cabin. He would have expected the warden to not want the campers digging so close to her home, but several holes were right up against the cabin wall. The holes were closer together here as well, and they were of different shapes and sizes. Mr. Sir knocked at the door. Stanley still held the empty sack. Yes, the warden said, opening the door. There's been a little trouble out on the lake, Mr. Sir said. Caveman will tell you all about it. The warden stared at Mr. Sir a moment, then her gaze turned toward Stanley. He felt nothing but dread now. Come in, I suppose, said the warden. You're letting the cold out. It was air-conditioned inside her cabin. The television was going. She picked up the remote and turned it off. She sat down on a canvas chair. She was barefoot and wearing shorts. Her legs were as freckled as her face and arms. So what is it you have to tell me? Stanley took a breath to steady himself. While Mr. Sir was filling the canteens, I snuck into the truck and stole a sack of sunflower seeds. I see. She turned to Mr. Sir. That's why you brought him here? Yes, but I think he's lying. I think someone else stole the sack and Caveman is covering up for X-Ray or somebody. It was a 20-pound sack and he claims to have eaten them all by himself. He took the sack from Stanley and handed it to the warden. I see, the warden said again. What's going to happen? The sack wasn't full, said Stanley. I spilled a lot. You could check my hole. In that room, Caveman, there's a small flowered case. Will you get it for me, please? She pointed to a door. Stanley looked at the door, then at the warden, then back at the door. He slowly walked toward it. It was a kind of dressing room with a sink and a mirror. Next to the sink, he saw the case, white with pink roses. He brought it back to the warden, and she set it on the glass coffee table in front of her. She unclasped the latch and opened the case. It was a makeup case. Stanley's mother had one similar to it. He saw several bottles of nail polish, polish remover, a couple of lipstick tubes, and other jars and powders. The warden held up a small jar of dark red nail polish. You see this, Caveman? He nodded. This is my special nail polish. Do you see the dark, rich color? You can't buy that in a store. I have to make it myself. Stanley had no idea why she was showing it to him. He wondered why the warden would ever have the need to wear nail polish or makeup. Do you know what my secret ingredient is? He raised and lowered one shoulder. What do you guys think it is? Red nail polish? Secret ingredient? What do we think? Any guesses? Good guess. Let's see. The warden opened the bottle. Rattlesnake venom. With a small paintbrush, she began applying it to the nails on her left hand. It's perfectly harmless when it's dry. She finished her left hand. She waved it in the air for a few seconds, then began painting the nails on her right hand. It's only toxic while it's wet. She finished painting her nails, then stood up. She reached over and touched Stanley's face with her fingers. She ran her sharp, wet nails very gently down his cheek. He felt his skin tingle. Oh my gosh, this is scary. The nail on her pinky just barely touched the wound behind his ear. A sharp sting of pain caused him to jump back. The warden turned to face Mr. Sir, who was sitting on the fireplace hearth. So, you think he stole your sunflower seeds? No, he says he stole them, but I think it was. She stepped toward him and struck him across the face. Oh my gosh, this is violent, huh? Mr. Sir stared at her. He had 3 long red marks slanting across the left side of his face. Stanley didn't know if the redness was caused by her nail polish or his blood. It took a moment for the venom to sink in. Suddenly, Mr. Sir screamed and clutched his face with both hands. He let himself fall over, rolling off the hearth and onto the rug. The warden spoke softly. I don't especially care about your sunflower seeds. Mr. Sir moaned. Oh my God, this is intense, huh? If you must know, said the warden, I liked it better when you smoked. For a second, Mr. Sir's pain seemed to recede. He took several long, deep breaths. Then his head jerked violently, and he let out a shrill scream worse than the one before. The warden turned to Stanley. I suggest you go back to your hole now. Stanley started to go, but Mr. Sir lay in the way. Stanley could see the muscles on his face jump and twitch. His body writhed in agony. Stanley stepped carefully over him. Is he... Excuse me, said the warden. Stanley was too frightened to speak. He's not going to die, the warden said. Unfortunately for you. Ooh, why do you think she said unfortunately for you? First of all, we learned something major about the warden, right? This woman is more than we kind of thought she was. She's got some cruelty in her, huh? And then she said, he's not going to die, the warden said, unfortunately for you. Why is it unfortunate for Stanley, do you think, that Mr. Sir is not going to die? What do you think Mr. Sir is going to think after he recovers from this horrible experience? Who do you think he's going to blame? Let's keep reading. Chapter 21. It was a long walk back to his hole. Stanley looked out through the haze of heat and dirt at the other boys, lowering and raising their shovels. Group D was the farthest away. He realized that once again he would be digging long after everyone else had quit. He hoped he'd finish before Mr. Sir recovered. He didn't want to be out there alone with Mr. Sir. He won't die, the warden had said, unfortunately for you. Walking across the desolate wasteland, Stanley thought about his great-grandfather, not the pig stealer, but the pig stealer's son, the one who was robbed by Kissin' Kate Barlow. He tried to imagine how he must have felt after Kissin' Kate had left him stranded in the desert. It probably wasn't a whole lot different from the way he himself felt now. Kate Barlow had left his great-grandfather to face the hot, barren desert. The warden had left Stanley to face Mr. Sir. Somehow, his great-grandfather had survived for 17 days before he was rescued by a couple of rattlesnake hunters. He was insane when they found him. When he was asked how he had lived so long, he said he found refuge on God's thumb. He spent nearly a month in a hospital. He ended up marrying one of the nurses. Nobody ever knew what he meant by God's thumb, including himself. Stanley heard a twitching sound. He stopped in mid-step, with one foot still in the air. A rattlesnake lay coiled beneath his foot. Its tail was pointed upward, rattling. Stanley backed his leg away and then turned and ran. The rattlesnake didn't chase after him. It had rattled its tail to warn him to stay away. Thanks for the warning, Stanley whispered as his heart pounded. The rattlesnake would be a lot more dangerous if it didn't have a rattle. What do you think he means by that? Why would it be more dangerous without a rattle? And pay attention to the part about Stanley's great-grandfather, who was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow in the desert and then was left stranded in the desert for days and days. I can't remember now. I think it said 17 days or something. And remember that he survived by 17 days because he took refuge on God's thumb, okay? File that away in your brain. That may or may not come back later on. Okay. Hey, caveman, called Armpit. You're still alive. What'd the warden say? Asked X-Ray. What'd you tell her? Asked Magnet. I told her I stole the seeds, said Stanley. Good going, said Magnet. What'd she do? Asked Zigzag. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. Nothing. She got mad at Mr. Sir for bothering her. He didn't feel like going into details. If he didn't talk about it, then maybe it didn't happen. He went over to his hole, and to his surprise, it was nearly finished. He stared at it, amazed. It didn't make sense. Or perhaps it did. He smiled. Since he had taken the blame for the sunflower seeds, he realized the other boys had dug his hole for him. "Okay, thanks," he said. "Don't look at me," said X-Ray. Confused, Stanley looked around from Magnet to Armpit to Zigzag to Squid. None of them took credit for it. Then he turned to Zero, who had been quietly digging in his hole since Stanley's return. Zero's hole was smaller than all the others. Why do you think Zero would have finished the hole? It wasn't Zero who stole the seeds. Why do you think? Any ideas? Why would Zero dig Stanley's hole for him? Okay, that's where we're going to stop today. See you next time.